Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It's here. It's finally here, almost, allegedly, a couple hours away. It's April 30th, 2023. I'm your host, Nate Pike. This is, hopefully, the last night before the writ drop. It's election eve. Pretty soon, the lieutenant governor is going to be coming down the chimney and dissolving the government or something like that. I don't know. Make sure you have your milk and cookies out, though. We have a lot to talk about tonight. So we're going to get right into it, and we're going to start with a little thing that Danielle Smith did earlier this week, because we did have a couple of press appearances very early on in the week. The first one, she appeared to talk about some new treatment centers, and then she talked about some other things.
There a need for new legislation, and under what specific circumstances would you want to see people placed into involuntary care?
Well, mental health and addiction, while sometimes tied, can be different. My understanding under the Mental Health Act is that it's 72 hours that you are allowed to hold someone.
No. Just no. It's not at all. Once again, Danielle Smith demonstrating she doesn't really have a clue what she's talking about, which begs the question, why is it that Danielle Smith and the UCP are looking at potentially introducing legislation that would allow a group of people to take someone against their will and force them into treatment for drug use, for addictions? Now, let's just let's not ignore, let's acknowledge the fact that when we're talking about forced treatment, all of the evidence is it's super bad. It's really harmful. It doesn't work. It puts people at greater risk. So there's no really good medical scientific evidence to do this thing. But Danielle Smith's justification in that clip appears to be, well, if we want to hold people 72 hours, it's just not long enough to do a treatment plan. It's just not long enough to make sure that they're going to get all the way through. And that's not how any of this works. So under the Mental Health Act, there's a couple of different ways that somebody can be taken into custody, and it involves the creation of an admission certificate. Now, an admission certificate typically is something that's filled out by somebody who has the legal authority to do so, somebody like a physician or a police officer or a judge or a psychologist or psychiatrist. Those people have the ability to say, hey, we're a little bit concerned about what's going on here. We think you might be a danger to yourself or others, so we're going to put you on a hold. One certificate, so if you have one person issuing that certificate, has the ability to hold someone for up to 24 hours to be assessed. Now, when we start to talk about two admission certificates, especially when there is one of those people who is a psychologist or a psychiatrist, that's when, after they've been assessed, they have the ability to be held for a significantly longer period of time. Now, one of the other things that Danielle Smith seemed to allude to was something called community treatment orders. And those, again, it really depends on what the specifics are for the situation, but they can be renewed and they can be issued for up to 6 months at a time. So again, Danielle Smith appears to be just talking for words' sake without having any awareness of what the actual legislation is that already exists to make sure that people who are a threat to themselves or to others have the ability to have interventions applied and have treatments applied. Now, it's really important to highlight that one of the defining features of that is either somebody's determined to not have medical capacity, they're not able to make decisions for themselves because of some sort of mental illness or disability. That's something that's assessed by a physician or a psychiatrist. But it's also important to realize that when we're talking about are they a threat to themselves or others, one of the hallmark pieces is this person saying, I actually want to hurt myself, or I actually want to end my life? And in the absence of that, you're not going to see anybody held on a psychiatric hold, nor should you. People are allowed to make bad choices. Now, those bad choices do come with consequences, but people are allowed to absolutely make bad choices. We talked about this on the last episode where we talked about the fact if somebody decides to drive faster than the speed limit, yeah, they're taking risks. Does that mean that they want to die? Not necessarily. One of the unintended consequences could be that they die or that they kill someone else because they're not driving in a safe manner. But if the intent isn't to do those things, then the intent isn't to do those things. Danielle Smith apparently wants to just ignore all of that and say, if arbitrary person decides that we're going to say that this person needs to be treated for addiction against their will, despite the fact that doesn't work, we're going to go ahead and do it anyways. But that's not all that Danielle Smith had to say at the press conference, because one of the questions that came up had to do with the lawsuit that appears to not be happening.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. I wanted to ask about, you're coming up on the deadline here of the defamation lawsuit notice that you'd sent to CBC. And I just curious as to, we're a few days away, and I just want to know what your commitment level is at right now. I mean, CBC has said they're standing by their reporting. There's been no apology as of yet. You're a few days out. What is the percentage level in terms of commitment of actually filing that?
Look, we're a few days out from another pretty monumental thing that's going to happen in this province too, and that's an election call. So I'm focused on that right now and will be until May the 29th, election day.
Now, the deadline for anyone who's paying attention was Friday. There's been no public mention of any of those, any sort of lawsuit being filed against the CBC. This goes back to the CBC stories where they talked about the whole Artur Pawlowski situation. Danielle Smith claimed that those recordings that they released where she spoke herself were defamatory because she made herself look bad and CBC played the recording or something. I'm not a legal scholar, but that's the gist of what it was. And she claimed that she was going to go ahead and launch a lawsuit if CBC didn't issue a full apology. There were a lot of people at the time who said, you know what, I think that this maybe just sounds more like she's looking for a little bit of a shield so she doesn't have to talk to about it. Because if there's legal litigation going on, then she can say, it's a matter before the courts. And she tried to do that when she announced that she was making this threat of a lawsuit. She said on the advice of counsel she wasn't allowed to talk about it because there was pending legal action, rana. Well, as we know, a couple weeks back, the NDP filed a complaint with the ethics commissioner. And when they filed that complaint with the ethics commissioner, one of the things that happened is Danielle Smith got herself a brand new shield. And so she then had the ability to say, hey, you know what? There's this investigation before the ethics commissioner. I can't talk about it. You should probably talk to her. Never mind the fact that the ethics commissioner isn't allowed to even confirm that there's an investigation going on. It's just Danielle Smith's word that it happened and the NDP's word that it happened. But the ethics commissioner isn't allowed to say anything. So Danielle Smith now has the barrier of being able to say, hey, you know what? I'd love to talk about this. I'd love to address this, but there's an ongoing thing with the ethics commissioner, so I can't. Which is probably why she never launched the lawsuit that would have been doomed to failure anyways. Moving on from there, a couple of other smallish but important stories that popped up in the news this week that have to do with Alberta politics. One of them has to do with the creation of a new fugitive apprehension sheriff's support team. And the Coles Notes is basically sheriffs, or what some people speculate is going to be the new provincial police force. Sheriffs are getting a boatload of more resources so that they can hunt down people who have warrants. So the press release reads, as crime continues to rise across Canada, Alberta's government is taking action to apprehend criminals in the province before they can reoffend. Budget 2023 will invest $2 million into the FAST program. This team will help apprehend suspects wanted on outstanding warrants to ensure they are processed through Alberta's justice system. So it's basically a $2 million infusion into the sheriffs, but it also gives the sheriffs a little bit more latitude to operate across the province. Now, as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot of people who have suggested, you know what, maybe this provincial police force that Danielle Smith keeps talking about how badly she wants, maybe that's just going to be the sheriffs. Maybe she's just going to expand the sheriffs more and more and more until it becomes a de facto provincial police force, kind of like the FBI for the United States. So instead of having jurisdictions like police officers in Calgary could be police officers in Calgary. They can't really police officer in Edmonton and vice versa. Well, what if you had this body like the sheriffs that was able to respond all across the province? They had the authority all across the province. It sounds a lot like the provincial police force that Danielle Smith has pitched. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen there. Moving on from there. Another story came out of the Parkland Institute. And this is a fascinating little one because it has some pretty major changes to how post-secondary funding works. Historically, the way that post-secondary funding works is if you were going to get public dollars for private post-secondary schools, you had to be a not-for-profit school. Well, the UCP changed the rules. And the Parkland Institute did an excellent job of highlighting it because what they caught was that on March 30th, the UCP government added a sixth school to the list, Makemie College. What makes Makemie different from the other schools is that it's a private for-profit business. So instead of it being something like the University of Calgary or even Mount Royal University, it's more like some of you might remember a little organization called DeVry. It's kind of like that in that it's for profit. For the first time anywhere in Canada, the UCP has made it possible for a private for-profit educational institution to receive public dollars. So it's kind of like R-Star, but there's no cleanup required. So companies that are supposed to be operating as private entities because they're for-profit entities now have the ability to say, hey, you know what? We'd like to get some of that sweet, sweet public money so that we can offset some of our costs. That would be great if we could do that, please. And the UCP is saying yes to at least one school. Now, obviously, the concern is that if there's one school that's getting this funding, the odds are very, very good that there will be a second school that gets this funding, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth. And at what point are Alberta taxpayers subsidizing private for-profit schools and organizations? It's probably going to be one of the questions that comes up in the election. Speaking of questions that come up in the election, though, one of the other things that the UCP kind of, sort of tried to make some hay with came out of a press conference that Rachel Notley did with a couple of her NDP candidates earlier in the week as well. Question had to do with Bill 6. Some of you might remember when the NDP first came to power in 2015, they introduced a bill called Bill 6. And it was basically, the idea of it was, hey, we got to make some work standards for farms because there's folks on farms who are getting taken advantage of, and we got to do something about that. The problem was that there was almost no consultation done. And what consultation that was done certainly wasn't effective or considered before the bill was proposed, because a lot of farmers lost their minds at some of the rules that the NDP were proposing. Now, the NDP had to walk a bunch of it back, and they made some revisions to the bill. But the question came up, hey, are you going to reintroduce Bill 6?
You'll be reintroducing a bill similar to Bill 6.
Well, there's no question that we remain concerned about safety for farm workers all across the province. That's a really important issue. I think that became super clear during COVID. No question about that. And as you know, when the UCP undid Bill 6, they also undid a whole bunch of other things, like, for instance, a minimum wage. A lot of people don't know that farm workers in Alberta actually aren't necessarily entitled to be paid the minimum wage under the UCP regime, and that seems a bit inappropriate. So we would be looking at it, but you know, we learned from last time, and we know that that we need to consult with farmers and employers in that sector. We know that we had made good progress after the fact last time in terms of having a whole bunch of reaching a lot of agreement with key leaders within the sector, and so we would go back to where that work had left off, and then we would hope to be able to move forward on some elements of it after we've had a chance to really talk with folks in the sector.
Now, I just want to be clear for a second. The audio at the beginning of the clip, that was all NDP. That was not us. We own our audio problems when we have them here, and God knows that we have no shortage of audio problems on this show from time to time. But that was hot off of the NDP feed, so Don't get spicy with us for that. But it's important to highlight that when Rachel Notley was talking about the possible return to a Bill 6 type bill, as much as the UCP is trying to present it as, hey, you know what? They're going to bring back Bill 6 and all of the very bad things. It's taken wildly out of context. And we're certainly going to see more and more of things taken wildly out of context on both sides as we get farther and farther into the election. But one thing that didn't seem to have any confusion, any uncertainty around it until it absolutely did was the big announcement for Calgary. $1.2 billion deal reached on a Calgary arena project that replaces the Saddle Dome. In the run-up to the municipal election, there was an arena deal that was on the table, and then it fell apart, and everybody went, no. And it turns out, depending on who you ask, there's been a deal in the works for the last 18 months. Now, it was a fascinating press conference to watch because the mayor got up there, the mayor of Calgary, Dr. Jody Gonda, got up there and she said, hey, we've been working on this for months and months and months. It's been a huge, big thing, 18 months in the works. We've been building trust, building relationships, working with stakeholders, all of the things. And then we had a city councilor get up and say, yeah, I was the one who was lead on this and it's been collaborative and we've been working together. And then Danielle Smith got up and said, I wrote a letter and fixed it. It's all me. You're welcome. But that's not all that Danielle Smith had to say at this press conference.
There's still one more hurdle in front of us as we get to the finish line. After the election, the province's contribution to this arena deal must be approved by Provincial Cabinet and the Treasury Board before the end of summer. That's why on May 29th, I'm hoping Calgarians give our UCP government a clear mandate to proceed with this arena deal. Calgary, it's time to move on with this project. We can't afford to go back.
So it's pretty clear what Danielle Smith is saying there. She's saying, hey, you know what? I couldn't get together with cabinet to approve the arena deal in time before the election. It could just be because, I don't know, we shut down the legislature a week early with both sessions that we had, or maybe I'm just looking to leverage it like crazy in the upcoming election. Or some people who thought maybe she misspoke. But as we saw very, very quickly from materials that the Danielle Smith and the party sent out, nope, she meant it. This is from her Instagram. Such an exciting day for Calgary, and who better to celebrate it with than Lanny McDonald? Calgarians will get the final say. That's why on May 29th, I'm asking Calgary for a clear mandate to proceed with the arena deal. So there's really no confusing what the message is here. If you want to have this arena under this deal, of which the details are, let's go with, a little bit lacking, then you'd better vote for my government because otherwise, you know, I can't make any guarantees about what's going to happen. Like the province came forward and we said, here's the deal, and everybody's on board. And boy, if a new government came in, that sure would be a shame. Better vote for the UCP if you want that new arena, Calgary. Now, there's a lot of people who have a lot of concerns about this because it is very much putting a boatload of taxpayer dollars to pay for the arena. And the biggest place that those taxpayer dollars are being used to offset isn't on the city side. It's to decrease the amount that the organizations, the private organizations, are going to have to pay in order to get the arena doing. Now, Danielle Smith has tried to make it very clear. You know what, though? We're not actually paying for the arena. We're just paying for all the infrastructure around the arena. So it's not like we're giving the money to the billionaires. It's just helping the billionaires spend less money. It's a very strange kind of logic that she's using. But this is where there's definitely some potential for some conflict of interest here. And this is where we got to talk about a few of the key players involved, because there's some key players involved. We got to talk about this guy. So this gentleman here is the owner, one of the owners of the Calgary Flames. He's also the owner of CNRL. And why does that get to be relevant really, really quickly? Because he's one of the key stakeholders in an organization called the Alberta Enterprise Group. Now, the Alberta Enterprise Group is sort of a consortium of businesses from across the province who want to put business first. Literally says that right on their website. Biggest thing is we got to put business ahead of everything else. And that very clearly seems to be the case. But where the conflict of interest comes in, that gentleman's name, by the way, is Murray Edwards, where the conflict of interest potentially comes in is, longtime listeners of the show will know, we've talked about the Alberta Enterprise Group before, and we talked about it because shortly after Danielle Smith announced that she was leaving talk radio. It was announced that she was hired to be the new president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. So here we have the organization that Danielle Smith was president of, one of their key stakeholders, who owns a good chunk of the Flames, who owns one of the oil companies that is heavily involved in this whole economic situation. There's all these connections, which is certainly enough to give some people pause. But even if you didn't want to give pause on that part alone, there's some other folks who have some questions about it as well. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation, who have been remarkably silent on a lot of Danielle Smith's free giveaways to corporations and her friends and stuff like that. They made it very, very clear politicians should not be hitting up the taxpayer to bankroll arenas for big league sports teams. The cost for this project ballooned quickly last time, and there's a huge risk taxpayers will be hit with runaway bills on this project. The NDP took a little bit of a softer stance. They came out and they kind of said, well, an arena is important, but we have some questions. They haven't said that they're going to kill the deal. They seem to be supportive of the deal, but they certainly are saying that they want to see what's going on. They want to see what's underneath the hood of the deal, if you will. And really, if we want to get a hard hitting, concise assessment as to whether or not taxpayer dollars should be going towards things like a giant arena, maybe we should go back into the books, thanks to, again, I got to give huge props out to the Twitter account @DisorderedYYC. They crush it finding these video clips. But let's go back a little bit and see what one of the ex-leaders of the opposition said about taxpayer dollars going to support billionaires.
I think that you would find that people are reluctant to support a proposal where middle-class taxpayers see a portion of their dollars that would go to support franchises where you do have, let's face it, millionaire players and billionaire owners.
That was, of course, Danielle Smith. And she does old Danielle Smith raises an excellent point. And that point seems to be even a little bit more relevant these days because, as Danielle Smith has campaigned on, one of the biggest issues facing Albertans is cost of living, the cost of everything. So why would the province take on hundreds of millions of dollars in extra spending for an arena deal for billionaires and big-time big league sports teams? When things are so tight in the province that Danielle Smith is sending out $100 for every kid and $100 for every senior, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be dumping money in this unless, of course, it is exactly about trying to leverage a deal heading into the election. What's particularly stunning about this, A, is that City Council went along for the PR ride on this one, and B, the fact that you had the mayor, you had the city councilor up there saying, collaborative, 18 months, it's been a big deal. And then Danielle Smith coming in and stealing all of their thunder and saying, nah, you know what? It was really just me. Moving on from there, we had some candidate stuffs come up. Ooh, it was a spicy little week for candidate stuffs, wasn't it? We're going to start by talking about this guy here. This is Eric Bouchard. He is Jason Kenney's replacement, if you can believe it, in Calgary Lougheed. And he has got some complex stuff going on. He campaigned in the nomination. One of his big things in the nomination had to do with freedoms and lockdowns and how COVID destroyed businesses and everything was horrible because of COVID. And he lost his business because of COVID. But it turns out there's a little bit more to the story. And it turns out how that story's been told is actually really quite controversial. Because Mr. Bouchard appeared in a news story in November of 2016, where he talked about how he had moved his restaurant from its previous location to downtown to try to take advantage of the low leasing rates because the downtown economy was in the toilet. So you could get access to leasing prices that were previously impossible to get a hold of because downtown was stuck on suck, in effect. Now, he did a whole story about how he had moved his business into the downtown core, hoping that it was going to be, oh, it's going to be great. And it turns out, to quote himself, we aren't making any money. So his business was in the toilet well before 2016. Nonetheless, when COVID came along, it seems like it made a very convenient excuse because he tweeted out just a little bit over a year ago, he tweeted out towards Giancarlo Cara. Giancarlo Cara just got a happy anniversary text from Nenshi. Today is 2 years since we first signed the state of local emergency that officially commenced YYC's participation in the COVID-19 pandemic. 2 years, wow. Now, obviously, that's not the best worded tweet when it comes to tone. But if we're going to talk about tone, Mr. Bouchard's response, happy anniversary, you sick fuck. Destroying small businesses and people's lives is nothing to celebrate. Maybe time for a career change. Give your head a shake, asshole. At Jikara, at Nenshi, at IceTYYC. And then here's where it gets a little bit telling, at Without Papers Pizza, which was a business that refused to stick with the rules that were put down not only by the city but the province when it came to the vaccine passports. Now this gets paired with a document that we were sent where just in February 2nd of 2023 there was a writ of enforcement that was put against Mr. Bouchard for almost $200,000. So he was in default to the tune of almost $200,000 to the Bank of Montreal. Now, it's probably very convenient to say, you know what? It was COVID. But the reality is, when you take a look at the fact that he moved his business downtown during an economic slump, and he's on the record in 2016 saying that his business was not doing well, it was not making any money, it's very convenient to try to turn it into the COVID narrative. But that seems to contradict his own official record on the issue. But that wasn't his only social media stuffs that caused him some problems. He retweeted. Now, we're not going to play the video because the video is just gross. It's available on our Twitter feed if you want to watch it, but we're not gonna play it again. It came from the Pleb Reporter, and it's a attempt at sarcasm. I don't know. Somebody needs to practice their sarcasm maybe a little bit, where it's basically a mockery of everything that some people would consider to be woke or progressive. It was retweeted by this Ashley Steen account with the hashtag. Because one of the things that came up in that video was I'm flying the flag colors of Ukraine in the background, and I've got it in my Twitter profile because I'm a good person and I support Ukraine. This Ashley Steen account here added the hashtag Zelensky war criminal. This is what the candidate for Lougheed for the UCP decided to retweet. He didn't retweet the Pleb Reporter's video. He retweeted the tweet that had the Zelensky war criminal hashtag. But it gets even more problematic for Mr. Bouchard because, of course, it does. He held a fundraiser this week on Wednesday, and it was attended by some folks. One of them is a gentleman named Sheldon Yakuchuk. He runs a Twitter account and Substack that is the most fertile breeding ground for conspiracy theories, anti-science, anti-vax rhetoric that you will see. And Mr. Yakuchuk decided to attend. He ran into some folks. Ran into Corey Morgan from the Western Standard, who has opinions about things. That's just a statement with no value attached to it. You can look up Mr. Morgan. We can't. He blocked us. But he also ran into Theo Fleury there. And there were a lot of other people there. And this is where it comes right back to Danielle Smith. Because the organization Canada Unity tweeted out this picture, put this picture on Facebook the next day. James Batter and Sandra Collins Batter with Premier Danielle Smith and Ontario trucker Harold Junker at a dinner and silent auction in Calgary, doing our part to make sure Alberta is a beacon of freedom to the rest of Canada. Now, let's just take a quick sec to talk about who this James Bowder dude is, because it gets to be kind of important kind of fast. James Bowder is one of the original organizers of not just the main convoy that we saw occupy Ottawa, but he's also one of the organizers of a previous convoy that kind of petered out a little bit, didn't really get the traction he wanted. Where it gets to be really important, though, is James Bowder is one of the authors of the Memorandum of Understanding that the convoy went to Ottawa with, where they were calling for the overthrow of the federal government. This is a document that's in our Twitter feed. They deleted it after a couple of weeks because they realized that overthrowing the government wasn't something that the nation was going to be getting behind. But nonetheless, it's the document that they touted at the very beginning. And Mr. Bowder was very, very clear. He wanted to see the convoy group, Canada Unity, be installed as part of the new government that the Governor General would install, because they said please and showed up with trucks. He still has criminal charges facing him. So yet again, here we have Danielle Smith hanging out with people who have ongoing issues before the courts, and she's more than happy to take time to pose with pictures. Now, the UCP came out and said, she had no idea. That causes some questions too. The first thing that we have to talk about is it is truly remarkable, the notion that at a private fundraiser for the candidate for Lougheed, nobody would be checking to see who the people were who were attending while the Premier of Alberta was there. That is either some of the worst event management in the history of event management and some of the worst security that you could manage, or they knew exactly who these people were and when they were going. But Danielle Smith was like, no, you couldn't have known that there were convoy folks there. It wouldn't have been possible to have any idea unless, of course, you looked at some of the hoodies in the room. This is a picture that she tweeted out from her account. I had a wonderful time in Calgary at a public fundraiser at the Fresh and Local Market Kitchens. Thanks for coming. Please consider donating $20 tonight so we can buy more lawn signs, flyers, coffees, and everything else we need to win. Donate now at Rena. And then she shared 4 pictures. And when you take a look at the pictures, you can see that one of the gentlemen is in the picture. He's wearing the Truck Trudeau with the date of the convoy. Hoodie. He's got a big grin on. Danielle Smith is standing there. So let's be clear. This isn't just a question of, hey, maybe Danielle Smith didn't know who James Bowder was. Maybe that's just one of the things that Danielle Smith, who followed the convoy, who spoke about the freedom movement, who knew who Archer Pulowski was, so much so that she took his phone call. Danielle Smith didn't know who James Bowder, who testified at the Emergency Act hearings. She didn't know, who was all over the national news. She didn't know who James Bowder was. Even if you want to go down that road, the fact of the matter is, Danielle Smith and her handlers, all of the staffers who were there, the organizers of the event, saw absolutely nothing wrong with having the Premier of the province pose with somebody in a Truck Trudeau hoodie. It strains believability. So much so that even James Bowder came out in an article with Press Progress. He said a couple of different things, but the long and the short, the headline from the Press Progress article is Convoy Leader Photographed with Danielle Smith says Alberta Premier should know who he is. Here's the quote. I don't know why she's making that statement, Bowder told Press Progress. We know of each other, Bowder said. I'm a public figure. She's a public figure. Reacting to Smith's statement for the first time, Bowder suggested paying close attention to how Smith uses the word personally. Personally, yes, exactly, Bowder said. That's an exact, accurate statement. I don't know her personally, so that's what she says to be politically safe during an election campaign. But I know of her, and she knows of me. So even James Bowder doesn't believe that Danielle Smith didn't know who she was posing with when she posed for that picture. But again, it cuts both ways, because if she did know and she chose to pose for that picture, that's a little problematic. If she didn't know and she chose to pose for that picture, that's still a little problematic. So no matter what we have going on here, at a fundraiser for a candidate, we've got some very legitimate issues that are going on. But those weren't the only issues that we saw going on this week with UCP candidates. It's just the gift that keeps on giving. We got to talk about Chelsea Petrovich for a minute. I think it's Petrovich. I've been told it's Petrovich. I'm going with Petrovich. If I'm wrong, it wouldn't be the first time. I mispronounce names. I try not to. It's Petrovic. This is the candidate from Livingstone, MacLeod. Hey, guys. Who went on the podcast where she said, well, you know, if people are coming into the hospital with heart attacks, they got to take some personal responsibility. Worth noting, she's a nurse. She's a registered LPN, apparently. Worth also noting, the podcast that she appeared on, that she made those comments on, was a podcast that's hosted by none other than David Parker. Who's David Parker? David Parker is the brains, allegedly, behind the organization Take Back Alberta. David Parker is the guy who is working with Chelsea Petrovich's campaign manager, Marco Van Hugenboos, who is still facing charges regarding the Coutts blockade. He's allegedly one of the organizers of the Coutts blockade. He was also the chief financial officer for Take Back Alberta. Now, it's also worth noting Chelsea Petrovich's, as we've highlighted on the show before, her husband appears to have participated in certainly a number of convoys. And from his own social media, it appears that he participated in the Coutts convoy and blockade. This is the same husband who also had the pro-Putin stuff up on his social media. That's all since been purged. Well, it turns out, as much as Chelsea Petrovich purged her social media when she was elected mayor and when she started running for the UCP, it sounds like there's a history that goes back here. And there's potentially some real gems, and by gems, I mean hand grenades, that exist in her social media. Because just this morning, she released this statement. With the provincial election campaign about to officially begin, I wanted to offer this statement. As someone who's used social media since I was a teenager, I have many old social media posts I'm not proud of. Often I used humor to deal with trauma or high stress environments, and that includes using crude or inappropriate language. As someone who had no intention of ever seeking public life, there are some comments and posts that I know now I should have been more prudent about before engaging with. I regret not researching more topics over the past 15 years more thoroughly before commenting. I want to apologize unreservedly for these actions and any hurt that I have caused. I pledge to the residents of Livingston McLeod that moving forward, I will communicate in a way that is respectful. I'm thankful to my friends, family, and supporters for assisting me in being less rough around the edges and understanding that mistakes made on social media through the past 15 years do not define a person. Thank you for your continued support. So the argument that Chelsea seems to be making there is, hey, just because somebody demonstrates a pattern of behavior over 15 years doesn't mean that that demonstrates a pattern of behavior, it seems. Now, there's been a lot of speculation as to why this statement was made. The rumors are there are a significant number of other posts that are not only pretty controversial, but some of them are pretty graphic. And so it appears that this is communications management 101. Let's get ahead of this because we know it's coming, and we're going to issue this blanket apology. And hey, you know, we all make mistakes. That doesn't mean anything. And let's be clear. Social media is a complex thing. There's no question. People say controversial things on social media, and we've seen that there's been a real learning curve with how people interact with social media. There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that gets shared over social media. That's just a thing that happens. In order to be a responsible social media user, you got to be pretty aggressive with what you're vetting, what you're sharing. And I know that I've certainly I've come across a video where you see like the big explosion in the sky, and you're like, holy cow, that's crazy. Look at that. And then somebody says that's actually from 2012. Oh, damn it. Most people who are responsible with their social media use, when they recognize that this is something that happened, will go, shit, my bad. I'm really sorry. I shared this thing I shouldn't have in the moment. Most people don't wait until it becomes a potential liability to demonstrate who they are. But nonetheless, this appears to be what's happening. Chelsea Petrovich decided to get in politics. She scrubbed her social media. Clearly, there's a concern. Somebody's running around with some screenshots. Clearly, there's a risk for her that those screenshots are going to be released. But where this starts to get really problematic is in the fact that it seems like there's a couple of different standards going on here. The first standard that we have to deal with is the UCP went quite aggressively after the NDP in regards to social media posts from NDP candidates.
Frightening to think about what Rachel Notley and the NDP would do in government, or, quite frankly, what they would not do if given the chance. Let me be clear, the NDP has absolutely no plan whatsoever to address crime and disorders in community across Alberta. But worse, the NDP candidates' comments suggest resentment towards law enforcement and our justice system. Today, we are calling on NDP leader Rachel Notley to have each of these candidates explain their comments and why they're so out of touch with Alberta families. Calgary Bow NDP candidate Drew Farrell called Alberta police officers domestic abusers, saying, and I quote, "I can't help wondering about domestic abuse within law enforcement families. There's some sick rage there. I bet it goes home with them and the outcome goes largely unreported." Edmonton Ellerslie NDP candidate Rod Loyola said, "Alberta police officers commit crimes with immunity," saying, and I quote, "An EPS badge gives you the right to beat up citizens and not have to face criminal charges." In a speech in the legislature, Edmonton Whitemud NDP candidate Raki Pancholi advocated to cut police budgets, saying, and I quote, "I'm all for spending less money on our criminal justice system." Edmonton Highlands Norwood NDP candidate Janice Irwin shared the disgusting defund the police hashtag on social media. And Lethbridge East NDP candidate Rob Miyashiro supported a motion to cut the police budget in his city while he was serving on council. These comments and actions, particularly the disgraceful comments, are extremely serious and come from a party that has no plan or ability to tackle crime and disorder in our communities. At a time when Albertans are looking for real solutions on crime and disorder, these candidates are harboring deep-seated resentment against our men and women in uniform, and they are seeking to sow anger and division against law enforcement in our communities. So we want Rachel Notley to show some support for our police and show these candidates the door.
Show these candidates the door. Now, there's some context, again, that's missing from what happened there. We talked about this on previous episodes, but we'll go through a couple of them real quick. In regards to Drew Farrell's comments, Drew Farrell deleted the tweet, apologized for it after the fact, and made it clear that she was actually talking about the situation with U.S. police. This came after yet another example in the United States of United States police murdering a black person. There was a very emotionally charged time. That was Drew Farrell's response to it. And again, she apologized for it, retracted it, and added the context. But nonetheless, it seems like the premier in waiting, she's not the premier in waiting yet, decided that she was going to take these comments completely out of context and run with them. In regards to Rocky Pacholi's comments, those were one section of a larger statement that she made where she was talking about the fact that she was all for taking funding away from law enforcement if and only if that funding went toward preventative community-based programs, which have evidence-based backing that they work. So it's not that she was saying, hey, you need to take all the money away from the police. Ha, ha, ha. She was saying maybe we should deal with the causes, not just the symptoms of the things that are currently plaguing our society. And in regards to Janice Irwin's sharing of the hashtag defund the police, let me just scroll back through my graphics, because if sharing a hashtag that somebody else used should be disqualifying. The candidate for Calgary Lougheed, Danielle Smith's candidate for Calgary Lougheed, shared a tweet where he used the hashtag Zelensky war criminal. So let's just really be clear what we're talking about when we're talking about it. But it goes a step further. Because according to Rebecca Schultz, all of these candidates that she listed off as she ended, they should be shown the door. Well, oddly, we have Chelsea Petrovich, who not only made the comments about people who have heart attacks should take some personal responsibility, who's a healthcare worker. Not only do we have her comments, and apparently whatever else is in the pipe, not only do we have Eric Bouchard's comments, but both of those people remain UCP candidates. Now, who's not? Who took a hit in the last couple of weeks for sharing outrageous, hateful views? Well, let's go back to the Premier's Inclusion and Multiculturalism Council, because this gentleman, Tariq Khan, shared some stuff on social media several years ago. We highlighted this on our show ourselves, where there was no question it was anti-Semitic. There's no question that it was deeply disturbing. He had a picture of Benjamin Netanyahu, eating a baby, replete with blood spatter and everything. His posts were so egregious that the UCP in 2019 refused his ability to be a nominated candidate because they didn't want to have their brand associated with these sorts of things. Nonetheless, he was still appointed to the Premier's Council. And there's some questions about how he could have gotten on that council, because at the very least, when we take a look at who was at that appointment, at that press conference, the candidate who won the nomination in Calgary Northeast, who was running against him, it strains credibility that she would not have had any idea what had happened, what he was disqualified for. Rajan Sani, she was there at the press conference. After he was disqualified, his social media is full of him hanging out with Minister Mickey Amory, who was one of the people who was in that video with Rebecca Schultz. Well, he was removed. But here he is this week at Mickey Amory's campaign launch. So let's just recap real quick. This guy who said hateful, ignorant things, he got booted off the Premier's Council. Chelsea Petrovich, who not only is on record with some deeply controversial things, her husband is on record with some deeply controversial things. It appears that he was involved in the convoy. He may have been involved in the Coutts blockade. She gets to stay. Eric Bouchard, who's $200,000 in debt in collections, who blamed the failure of his business on COVID, who has used profanity all over social media, who allegedly is deeply, deeply involved with Take Back Alberta, he gets to stay. I wonder what the difference could be. I wonder what the delineating factor is that allows some candidates who say deeply hateful, problematic, offensive things to stay, and other people who are involved with the same organization to be rejected. I wonder what the difference could possibly be. I guess it'll just remain a mystery. Moving on from there, and speaking of Take Back Alberta, we got to talk about Take Back Alberta, because we got some problems. First, I got to find the right graphic, though. There we go. We saw a pretty bombshell piece of reporting done, an amazing piece of reporting done by the Globe and Mail and Carrie Tate, where she released sort of this explanation of what Take Back Alberta is, who they are, how they've been doing business, what they intend to do. And there were some pretty damning quotes in there. I want to go through a couple, because unfortunately the article was paywalled, so a lot of people wanted to read it. They couldn't read it. For those who have the ability to pay for real journalism, absolutely encourage you to do so. For those who don't, it sucks. We're not going to put the whole article up because that would be disrespectful, but we're going to try to share some quotes. So here's one of the things that Mr. Parker says at his presentations that he's been doing across the province. And of course, he's been doing them in a blue F-150. A small fringe minority with unacceptable views has taken over all of your institutions, Mr. Parker says, explaining why a pastor was arrested in Calgary for protesting a library program where drag performers read stories to audiences of all ages. They've taken over your legal system. They've taken over your education system. They've taken over your medical system. This is called othering. This is called creating an enemy. This is straight out of playbooks. This is where you say there's a small group of elites and they're trying to ruin your way of life. It couldn't be more out of a textbook, but that's exactly what's going on. And it's targeting the trans community. From the article, TBA is more complex than a classroom preparing pupils to sit on boards and vote for leaders. One of the things the TBA, this isn't a quote, but one of the things the TBA says is, hey, we're just trying to teach people how to get involved in democracy. TBA is more complex than a classroom preparing pupils to sit on boards or vote for leaders. It is a community for people who feel ostracized by the political class for their Christian beliefs and social conservative leanings. It is modeled after multi-level marketing schemes which can have sprawling reach and, at their most successful, thrive without much effort from the top. TBA is structured. Take Back Alberta is structured so that the people at the top, the black belts, can sit at the top. They can issue the instructions and they can have all of the little tendrils reaching out and doing all of the heavy lifting for them. It's incredibly manipulative. But this is the one that's really fascinating. Now, we alluded to this on a previous episode because we'd gotten wind of it as well. Mr. Parker got married. Danielle Smith attended the wedding. She's my friend, Mr. Parker explains over lunch, adding he populated his side of the guest ledger with people he worked with on projects. About 75 people attended the ceremony in Canmore. I lead an organization that has significant clout in terms of politics in the province, but I don't think it was an influence thing. He says, we have very similar passions. Now, there's a couple of different ways to unpack that, but the fact that Danielle Smith attended the wedding of the person who runs the organization, who claims to be responsible for getting rid of Jason Kenney, and who claimed to be responsible for getting Danielle Smith elected not only to the office of leader of the UCP, but also premier of the province. The fact that Danielle Smith attended his wedding, that's more than just a work relationship. And this is where we have to talk about some of the ways that Take Back Alberta does business and some of their goals. We've highlighted this before. We're going to talk about it again. David Parker got married. Yay for him. Who did he get married to? He got married to True North writer Rachel Emmanuel. Why does this turn into a province? Because inside of the Telegram group, which is sort of the chat channel, which is very, very heavily controlled, only admins can post in there. There was this little message a little while ago where David Parker linked to his wife's Twitter account and said, please share. We are making progress on the election tabulation machines. That story, that Twitter link led to one of these stories where they're manufacturing outrage and fear over the use of electronic. In one article, they're called voting machines. In the other article, they're called electronic tabulators. These are the machines that basically work like Scantrons. They're not something that we vote with. When we vote in the provincial election, you'll get your little piece of paper, you get the little things, you do your little X, and that's how it works. The electronic tabulators are a way to count all of the votes very, very quickly. Danielle Smith herself has confirmed that the paper voting pieces will still exist. If a recount needs to happen, if a manual recount needs to happen, a manual recount can still happen. But this is playing on a lot of the fear that we saw generated in the United States by Fox News over the whole Dominion voting machines piece, which led to a lawsuit, which led to apparently Tucker Carlson potentially getting fired, which led to, during the discovery process, a boatload of communications where Fox News employees openly admitted, hey, we're totally taking these people for a ride. We're just making shit up at this point. I'm paraphrasing. But it's on record. Unsurprisingly, Fox News settled that lawsuit rather than face it in court because they would have been taken to absolute work. But they spent a lot of time trying to convince people that the Dominion voting machines were unreliable. They were lots of potential fraud. They're stealing our elections using these electronic voting machines. And here we have David Parker signal boosting his wife's articles talking about this, where he's very clearly saying, we're making progress on the election tabulation machines. Now, nowhere does it say, oh, and by the way, my wife wrote these articles. Nowhere is there that kind of disclosure. Nowhere in any of these stories do you see Rachel Emmanuel saying, oh, by the way, the stuff that I'm writing about Alberta politics and the way that True North is trying to manipulate the narrative potentially, it's maybe there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there. We haven't seen any of that. But there's more, because there always is. One of the things that we saw just recently was Benita Peterson. Now, Benita Peterson is a complicated figure in and of her own right. She's somebody who was heavily involved in the freedom movement. She was heavily involved in the Convoy movement. She was heavily involved in the freedom protests and the freedom marches. She's now heavily involved in Take Back Alberta. Take Back Alberta, who's proud. Take Back Alberta, who has no problems representing themselves. They're not ashamed of anything. Well, here we have, hi all. As you're probably aware by now, there are some media representatives that attempt to portray TBA in a negative light. Therefore, we have a request to ask of you all. Please refrain from wearing your TBA t-shirts to UCP events. There are some members of the media that are apparently attempting to twist the facts. Let's deny them fuel for the fire, shall we? We also recommend that you don't bring up TBA when interacting with UCP supporters and potential UCP supporters. Not everybody is friendly to TBA. And with that being said, we still encourage you to wear blue. Let that conservative enthusiasm shine through. So even TBA is recognizing that they're deeply divisive, they're deeply polarizing, they're deeply problematic, and they're quite frankly at this point hurtful to the UCP's brand. So much so that they're saying, hey, how about maybe we just go a little bit quiet for a while so we don't screw things up. Now, why might people think that, hey, maybe there's some elements of Take Back Alberta that we're concerned with? Well, let's start with this other post from Benita Peterson, who's plugging a David Parker event. How do we ensure conservative victory on May 29th? And after May 29th, what is it we need to do to encourage individuals at all levels of government to make decisions that are in the best interests of the people? How do we effectively influence library boards to change policies so that healthy and appropriate boundaries return? Gosh, I wonder what they could be talking about. How do we do the same for municipally owned venues such as swimming pools? This is heavily coded language. They're talking about the drag story times. They're talking about some of the books and some of the conspiracy theories that have been floated about books that exist in public libraries. They're talking about stories like the one that we saw in Calgary, perpetuated by the Western Standard, that talked about a trans individual in a woman's washroom who was chasing people around with their genitalia. A story so outrageous that even CPS, the Calgary Police Service, issued a statement saying, we've investigated and it didn't happen. That's the agenda that Take Back Alberta is overtly pushing there. This is who they are. They're literally telling us who they are. And by the way, who they are is really important to pay attention to, because according to the same Globe and Mail story, they are running candidates in 14 or 15 seats. And as we talked about in our interview with Mr. Thomas Lukasik, the Honorable Thomas Lukasik, if those 14 or 15 candidates get elected, it doesn't matter about the other 35 candidates that maybe Danielle Smith brings to the table, 36, 37 candidates. If there's enough candidates that make up the difference between the number of seats that the UCP has and the NDP has, those 14 or 15 candidates who are mostly being run in rural Alberta can show up and say, hey there, Danielle Smith, that's a real nice government you've got there. Be ashamed if something happened to it. We sure wouldn't want to see the next bill that you get put forward. We wouldn't want to see that get turned into a non-confidence vote. That would be pretty bad for you, wouldn't it? Wouldn't want to see that happen. So here's what you're going to legislate. And Mr. Lukasik, who has been an MLA, he has been a minister, he has been a deputy premier, not only confirmed that that is a very real thing that could happen, he confirmed it's happened in the past, where small groups of extreme fringes have influenced the decisions and the policies of the premier of the province. So much so that that premier ended up resigning. That interview that we put up this week is a critically important interview, and we would encourage everybody to go. It's an hour and it's almost 90 minutes, but it doesn't feel like it. It's very important to understand the stakes of what we're playing here. And we have seen David Parker and we have seen Take Back Alberta repeatedly say, oh, no, we're just educating people here. But that's very clearly not the case. The fact that we have people like Mr. Lukasik who are stepping forward and they are saying, you know what, this election is so important because of people who are messing with the system, like Take Back Alberta. I'm going to lend my vote to the NDP. Somebody who served in Conservative government for 14 years has publicly endorsed the NDP. We saw today, this one blows my mind. We saw today a former Conservative Prime Minister, Kim Campbell, refer to Danielle Smith by saying, serious wingnut alert. This is a Conservative Prime Minister saying Danielle Smith is not just not conservative, she's a straight up wingnut. That should have everybody sitting up and paying attention because it's really serious. In fact, it's so serious that we are seeing not just Mr. Lukasik, not just former Prime Minister Kim Campbell step forward with this stuff, but we're seeing other people step forward as well and saying this election is so serious. There is so much at stake here. We got to hit the reset button. We saw this tweet from Samir Kiandi, who's the NDP candidate for Calgary Elbow. He had a fundraiser. At this fundraiser, Ron Gitter, who was a PCMLA from 1971 to 1979 and a Conservative senator from 1993 to 2000. Here he is, posing for a picture, smiling with the NDP candidate for Calgary Elbow. Lee Richardson, also pictured here. 1988 to 1993, a PC member of Parliament. Again, from 2004 to 2012, a PC member of Parliament under both Harper and Mulrooney, and he was eventually appointed as the Principal Secretary to Premier Alison Redford. And there's a quote from Mr. Richardson that I just want to share for a second because it's particularly relevant to what we're dealing with, and it certainly explains why he might have been willing to not only appear in that picture, but attend that fundraiser. On May 30th, 2012, Richardson resigned from Parliament as the member for Calgary Centre. In his farewell speech, he remarked to colleagues that while we advocate for different ideas of Canada, we are all Canadians and we all love our country. We would all, I think, do well to remember that and leave the partisan furies at the water's edge. And that is ideally how democracy and government should work. But right now, and for the next, 12 hours, we have a premier in the province of Alberta who has demonstrated a complete and total disregard for all of the rules, all of the norms that make government work. As Mr. Lukasik said in our conversation with him, she is undermining all of the things that make society go. She is eroding the trust in institutions. She is eroding the trust in justice. She's eroding the trust in government. This is a huge problem. And people say, I've been saying this for weeks, people say this is an election like no other. It's the most important election in the history. But I would challenge anyone to think of an election in recent history where it hasn't been a choice between ideology. Even in 2019, Mr. Kenney, he had his problems. I'm not defending Mr. Kenney by any stretch of the imagination. But he at least played by the rules. He knew how to manipulate the rules. He knew how to use the rules for his own advantage. He certainly had no problems emotionally manipulating constituents and the Albertans, but he played within the confines of the rules by and large. Danielle Smith doesn't do that. Even going back to 2015, as Mr. Lukasik pointed out, Rachel Notley and the NDP may have a different ideological approach to things and a different ideological vision for where the province of Alberta needs to go, but they play by the rules. They play through the norms. They weren't eroding those norms. You can dislike Rachel Notley and her decisions, and there's plenty to debate there. But they at least played by the rules. The UCP under Danielle Smith do not. And that's something that we all need to be really honest with and reckon with over the next little while. We got two other quick little things to talk about. Then we're going to open up to the floor. I can see we've already got at least one person who's waiting to speak. I know it's probably going to be fairly spicy. But before we get to our open mic, and for anybody who wants to be a part of our open mic, if you hop on the Twitter Spaces, we'll add you in. Love to hear your thoughts. If you think that I said something that was dumb, I probably did. But you can hop on the Twitter Spaces and call me out for it. Standard rules apply, no hate speech, all that good stuff. But we're going to open that up in just a minute. Before we do, though, we got us a DM that we got to talk about. We don't usually do the From the DMs on the live show. But this one is, it's quite the spicy little meatball. There's been a lot of controversy around the organization known as AIMCO. Now, AIMCO is an organization that manages pensions. And there's been some political rhetoric that's been bandied around, including by Danielle Smith and apparently her executive director office guy, Pitbull, attack dog, Rob Anderson, about, hey, if we've got these funds sitting in these pension funds, we could use them for infrastructure projects. We could use them to prop up oil and gas. We got options for that kind of stuff. And a lot of people have said, whoa, you don't go mess with the pensions. Because people have worked their entire lives to invest in those pensions. People make pension payments. It's not just free money in the way that some politicians like to talk about it. People pay into their pensions. And they count on their pensions. And they rely on their pensions to be able to support them through retirement. It's an important part of the social contract that exists with organizations that have pensions. There's been some changes to the pension board, and this one is particularly notable. This gentleman here is Mark Wiseman. He's the board chair of AIMCO. Now, we've seen over the last little while, there's been some new appointments. We saw the Travis Taves appointed John Horseman, who was a UCP leadership candidate for about 4.5 minutes before he dropped out and endorsed Travis Taves. Well, last week, as we talked about on the show, he got appointed to the board of AIMCO. Now, we received this DM, and it's pretty out there. I want to preface all of that with this. We have not been able to confirm it. The only reason why we're sharing it tonight is because it is when we got the DM and we saw the name that was attached to it, we were like, hold on a second there. Because this comes from somebody who has been deeply, deeply involved in conservative circles for quite some time. In a lot of different ways. We're not going to reveal it. We never reveal our DMs. People count on the anonymity, and we promise that we'll do that for always and forever. And again, we have no verification of this outside of it. But what this DM alleges really speaks to the stakes that are going on in this next election. I'm told Stephen Harper was promised the chair of the board of AIMCO after the election. Scoop of the year, talk about a cheap price for a video. The chair spot is open. As of March 20th, Mark Wiseman has said that he is stepping down. He's going to stay on to ensure a smooth transition, but there has not been a new chair named. And allegedly, according to this very, very conservative insider, much like the arena, that spot has been promised to none other than Stephen Harper, which might go a long way to explaining the rushed video with the horrible production value that we've all had a lot of fun poking fun at. We got one other thing that we want to talk about. Bill C-11, which is way more boring than people are making it out to be. So there's some right-wing media outlets that are calling it the Internet Censorship Bill. It's not that. It's basically, for anybody who grew up in the 90s or spent any time listening to the music in the 90s, it's the internet equivalent of CanCon. So it only affects streaming services. It doesn't affect your private social media. So your Facebook will be fine. Your Twitter will be fine. All of that stuff will be fine. It only comes down to services like Netflix or YouTube or things like that. And it wants to prioritize Canadian content. That's the whole ball game. But nonetheless, there's a lot of right-wing news organizations, companies, as some people might say, as you'll see in just a second here, who are trying to say that it's all about controlling what you're going to see on the internet, whether or not people can continue to be doing streaming or content generation on the internet. It's not what it's about at all. If you're in Canada and you're doing these things, it actually works out better. So why organizations like True North and the Rebel are lighting their hair on fire is a complete mystery to me. But there is this one interesting little piece that True North put out this week. It's worth remembering. We did a whole thing on True North a little while ago where we talked about the fact that for reasons that defy reasoning, they are a charity, which is not supposed to be a thing. They took over a charity a few years ago and they built their media empire on top of this charity. So when you support True North, let's use the Globe and Mail as an example. If you get yourself a Globe and Mail subscription, you don't get a tax receipt. You don't get a charitable tax receipt. Now, there are some programs that you can use for certain media outlets to write off some of that money for sure. But even with smaller organizations, let's use the Sprawl here in Calgary as an example. If you support the Sprawl, you can't claim that money on your taxes. So if you're a smaller media organization, you can't issue receipts saying, look, you get money back. Thank you for being generous. You get money back. Unless, of course, you're a charity. And there's only one that we could find that's structured the way that True North is structured, and it's True North. Now, they are very clear in all of their corporate documentation that what their news advocacy is research. Let's play the clip.
Messages that we're not folding up and going home. I mean, we're going to fight for this. We're going to fight for our audience, and we're going to keep going there. But how do you run an internet news company in a climate when the government, the very government we're trying to hold to account, says we need to regulate internet content?
Oh, what's that now? You're a news company, you say? You're not a charity anymore? You're a company for profit? Shocked expression. That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. We're going to move it on from there into the open mic. I can see that we've got one of our regular open micers who's ready to go. Very excited to welcome to the show again, Ziad Faisal. Ziad, how's it going tonight, man?
Oh, fine, thanks, Nate. A little bit spicy as you anticipated, but it's because I had some chicken tikka masala. So
nice.
Otherwise, I think I'll be mildly spicy, but hotly financial.
Okay.
So I want to talk about some arena numbers, if you like.
Oh, good.
So in 2019, I had done a chart package on the deal that was reached in the summer of 2019. And if we take a little walk down memory lane, that was the one where the building was $550 million. And the city and CSEC were putting in $275 million each. And there was an element of that deal where the city was allowed to impose a ticket tax of 2% on top of the ticket revenue for the arena, which was projected over the 35 years to make $155.1 million. So that was part of the city's return on its investment, is this 2% ticket tax. So me, took that 2% and divided backwards, and I discovered that over the 35-year term of that agreement, that's $7.75 billion in ticket revenue that CSEC would be receiving. So when you look at it, they were putting in $275 million, and that's only 3.6% of their ticket revenue. Now, CSEC has other sources of revenue, like the TV contract, like the advertising, like the naming rights, like food and beverage. So just from one revenue stream, CSEC was only putting in 3.6% in that deal, where they were putting in half the 550 million building. And in fact, for only 4.7% of ticket revenue, CSEC could have had the whole deal. They could have built the whole building, had total control of it. They could have owned it all for 4.7% of ticket revenue. And, that still gives them all the other revenues like advertising, food and beverage, TV contract, all that other good stuff. But that wasn't sweet enough. So we have this new deal that is made from misrepresentations to council, misrepresentations by certain councillors, and a very desperate Danielle Smith, who's a puppet of Murray Edwards, desperate to get seats in Calgary. So she throws a whole bunch of money at it. And when I mention misrepresentation or deceptions to city councillors, one of the ways you can find that is if you look at the 9-page report from administration to council, dated the 25th of April, 2023, which is on the city's website under City of Calgary Event Center. Strangely enough, they've put the fundings from the City of Calgary into 2 columns. They've got the previously approved cash, and then they've got the additional cash. And that's what I suspected was happening, is they're selling the deal to city councillors in terms of, well, we're only putting in another $250 million, but we're getting $330 million from the province. So this is a win. So I think this is why City Council voted unanimously for this deal over and above their usual eagerness to throw public money at billionaires' private profits. And that's this distorted math where it was, well, we get $330 from the province to put in the city for only $240 million. But nowhere else in that table of funding sources do you see the before and after for, let's say, CSEC, where CSEC's before was $275 million, or half the project, and CSEC's upfront money now on this $875 million building is only $29 million. So, they went from 275 upfront to 29 million upfront. So, it's funny, with the city, we see 2 columns, the old deal and the additional. Well, you can't look at the old deal because it fell apart in 2021. There's no value in putting it there. This is just a way of duping councillors into going, well, you only have to pay this much more. But that old money is not on the table anymore. That old deal is gone. You have to look at the new deal as a whole. And you have to look at what does each partner put in and what does each partner get out. And for all that the City of Calgary is putting in, it's getting out 0 revenues. And for $29 million up front, CSEC is getting 100% of the revenues. And that's what the value of an asset is. Like when we talk, it's a publicly owned building, Yeah, well, there's different layers of ownership. So when you own real estate, that ownership is, to a certain extent, a liability as well, because that real estate has things like property tax and insurance and security you've got to provide on. Even if you just got land sitting fallow, you have to put a fence on it, you have to make sure there's no hazards on it, you have to pay property tax on it. So the city's going to own this building, and depending on the agreement, the city may be obligated to keep the building up to date. And sometimes they're called state-of-the-art agreements.
Yeah, we don't have the details as much as Danielle Smith is like, I'll just read the paper for the details. When Mayor Gondek was on a couple of different media outlets this week, she was very clear. There's a lot that we still haven't figured out. This is a memorandum of understanding. I love how that term came up twice this week. This is a memorandum of understanding. We've agreed to the broad principles of the deal. There's a lot to still be worked out. So there's a lot of unknowns that very much remain, it seems like.
Can I give a bit more on the deal?
Absolutely.
So it's funny when we as taxpayers are being presented with a deal, the costs that we have to incur keep getting sliced up in different pieces and put in different pockets. So, City of Calgary, it's 295 million from before, and then 240 million additional. So it's being sliced up in different pieces. But nobody's putting together how much is the city paying upfront versus how much is CSEC putting upfront. So when you say that, oh, well, CSEC's putting in $330 million or $340 million, only 29 million of that is upfront. Whereas the city has to cover for the rest of that 875 million building. So the upfront money is CSEC 27 million, the province 29 million upfront, and the city 818 million. So that's a pretty large enchilada for the city to bite off. And you can say goodbye to other projects like the field house and other projects because up front, the city's got to put in 818 million of an $875 million building. Then you look at the $316 million of present value that's coming from the lease payments by CSEC. So these are only going up by 1% a year, which is a toy. It's not matching inflation. Our inflation is much higher than 1%, especially building construction inflation. And the discount rate or the cost of capital that's baked into this present value. So let me explain present value a little bit. So Nate, if I promise to give you $100 a year for 35 years, that's not the same as giving you $100 times $35 today. So the $100 that's a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, not worth as much. And stuff can happen in between now and then. Like if my $100 every year is based on keeping the Flames here happy, I can put a gun to your head and blackmail you for those future stream of $100. But if we're just looking at $100 today versus $100 a year from now, 2 years from now, that's discounted back using the cost of capital. And so the cost of capital baked in here is 5%. So the city's cost of capital to put up $818 million up front is 5%, whereas CSEC is only increasing its payments by 1% a year. they're only matching the cost of capital to the city by 1/5. So this deal just gets worse and worse every year.
I'm waiting for after the election. I mean, I think regardless of what the outcome of the election is, we're going to see a whole lot of new details and new things get announced. And I would not at all be surprised if the costs to the taxpayer go up, because one of the things that the Danielle Smith, it seems like she's trying to split the hair of is, well, hey, you know what, like the province isn't paying for the building. There's only one taxpayer. So taxpayers are now paying for the city of Calgary portion, and now taxpayers across the province are also paying for the province portion when we're talking about an organization that is owned by billionaires and that generates tremendous amounts of revenue a year.
Yeah.
We see this over and over and over again across North America where sports teams, and I'm not a sports guy, but I don't care if somebody likes the sports, you go and you enjoy the sports. But sports teams have developed a very effective strategy for holding municipalities hostage to get what they want at the lowest possible cost to them. And they just walk away making even more money.
And I'm curious about the role of this firm that the city of Calgary engaged, CAA Icon. So I think it was last year, the city of Calgary engaged CAA Icon, who were supposed to be arena funding experts or arena negotiating experts. Well, what role did they have? And why is it we got gouged on this deal? It's like, I never heard anything from CAA Icon afterwards. There's no economic impact assessment. There's no CAA Icon recommendation. There's like, how was the city advised on this deal? They may not have to disclose the details of their advice, but generally when a firm advises a government, it advertises it, right? It says this government was advised on this deal by CA Icon or Morgan Sachs or whoever.
I think so much of it has to do with the fact that the deal isn't done. It's as much as it's being advertised by the UCP as being the deal is done. The deal's not done. There's a memorandum of understanding. They've agreed to. These are the broad terms of the things, but in regards to what the specifics of the deal are, in regards to who's going to get what revenue from what, I mean, Mayor Gondek was on the radio just a couple days ago saying, we don't know, can't talk about it. We still got to figure all that stuff out. So
It's an yeah, it's an MOU, a memorandum of ultimatum. Vote for the UCP or lose the Flames.
there you go.
If you want, you can come back to me. I'll talk a little bit about the land options. Otherwise, I've got one more quick point to make, but I can also do that later on.
I'll tell you what, we got a couple of people in the queue, so why don't I come back to you? Because I don't know. I want to make sure that we don't shut anyone out.
Yeah, if you have time, great. Otherwise, yeah, happy to hear the other folks.
All right. We're going to bring Cassandra in. I think it's Cassandra Pollock. We're going to bring her in and see what she has to say. Cassandra, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing absolutely wonderful. I'm very exhausted.
It's just getting started, though.
Yeah, well, I'm on disability, so I don't always get out, and so I've exceeded what my normal highest activity level is for the day because I'm just so excited for campaign kickoff. But I said I was going to speak tonight for a very specific reason. When I watched the episode with Thomas Lukaszuk, I literally cried. I cried tears of relief. And the reason is and I've actually had some Twitter conversations and even some private message conversations with Thomas prior to that, because I had misspoken at one time because I was trying to make a point, because I was getting so tired of people throwing the word populism around, knowing full well that the most of the people that were listening don't even understand what they're talking about when they're using that word and how they're using it or anything. And pretty much I've been, even before Danielle Smith came in on this, became premier, for a couple of years, I've been screaming for somebody with some kind of credibility that people will listen to, because I know they don't listen to me like they listen to some other people. And to just let's explain it. Let's spell it out. Let's tell people, let's just hit them where it hurts. We got to speak out about it. And Thomas was so much more articulate than I could ever be on the subject, as well as he's much more knowledgeable. I mean, I'm pretty knowledgeable, but he has a certain intimate knowledge of things that I couldn't possibly have. And it was just a relief to finally hear somebody say the things that I've been wishing they would say, and say them out loud. And I just am eternally grateful to both you and Thomas for doing that.
Well, Thomas did all the heavy lifting. I just made a couple of jokes.
You made it happen, though. You made it happen, and you have a platform where people pay attention. And my platform, I don't have the following you do. And it was, no, you both made it happen. And it was such an important conversation. And I'm just eternally grateful. I felt like 100 million pounds was lifted off my chest when I heard that, there was multiple times I cried. So like I said to Thomas, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I cannot thank you enough.
Well, that's very kind. I don't do well with compliments, so I'm just going to try to bounce back from that. But no, I think that, here's the thing that I think is important for me about the conversation that I was lucky enough to have with Thomas. A couple of the big takeaways that I'll just take this opportunity to highlight. One of them is, I think you're absolutely right in that we do need more people speaking up. I think we're starting to see that. I mean, when Kim Campbell dropped that wingnut alert tweet today, I was just like, oh, it's getting real up in here. But I think we're going to see, I mean, we saw with the Samir's tweet, there's some very reasonable people who are looking at the current state of what's passing for conservatism in the province of Alberta, and they're going, oh no, this ain't that. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. My grandfather was very, very involved in provincial politics and federal politics on the conservative side of things, and I have no doubts in my mind that if he was to see what's going on, he's long since passed, but if he was to see what's going on in the province and what some people are trying to pass off as conservatism because that's the brand that works here, he would be absolutely livid. So
Agreed. And just one on the note of Kim Campbell, I voted for her. And, I'm not typically a conservative, but I voted for her because I remember even within her own party, the misogyny that went on was really horrible. And even to this day, some people have misunderstandings about some of the things that happened. I mean, I'm not saying she was perfect by any means, but that was a big reason why I voted for her, because she wasn't an unreasonable person. And no, yeah, I mean, I think she was quite respectable, and that's just my opinion, and I'm not a conservative.
yeah, no, I would agree with that assessment. I've been a big fan of her Twitter for a while, but I would also say the other big thing that I think is critically important that I took away from the Lucasic conversation is that more people need to see that. More people need to be made aware that there are a lot of people who are looking at the situation with conservatism in Alberta and going, "Oh, that ain't it," because and the fact that people like Thomas are starting to speak out, I think is critically important. But I think that and I'm not just saying this because it was our show that did the interview, but I think that that's something that people need to see. I think that video needs to be shared. I think that as many people need to see it as possible because he says some really, really important things, and he's not just speaking from a place of rhetoric and hyperbole. He's speaking from a place of legitimate documented experience.
Well, yeah, and I'm gonna say one more thing on that. I've shared it. I can't even even before I watched it, I had shared it a bunch of times. Like I shared it all day that day, and I still keep sharing it. But one of my friends actually said to me, "Thank you for sharing that. I thought I knew what populism was, but I now like we had a conversation, of course, too, and he was like, "Yeah, that's what Lukaszuk was saying." He goes, I really didn't get it until he explained it, and I knew what was going on, but I didn't understand what that was. So, I mean, if that's the only thing somebody gets out of it is they finally understand what all the media are talking about and other people are talking about when they're throwing that word around, if that's the minimum you get, that's a movement in the right direction.
Totally agree.
And I'm done. I could interject all day, but I'm too tired.
Awesome. Well, you get some rest because allegedly, I'm not going to believe it till the writs actually dropped. I'm just Alberta politics has been too much Alberta politicsy. So until I actually hear that the writ is dropped and it's official and it's done, I'm not going to believe that we're having the election. But if everything plays out the way that it's supposed to, it's going to be a busy month for everybody. So absolutely get your rest. I got two other callers in the queue. I'm going to bring in Herc, who I believe we had on either last week or the week before. And if I'm remembering correctly, Herc is coming up from the States. Herc, what's going on tonight?
Not much. I'm still celebrating the Toronto victory. My parents lived there for a year, and they were married there. So great to see that they got that stigma off of 19 years.
There you go. What's going on tonight, man?
I wanted to ask you about two subjects that have come up with your fellow Canadians. One is Chinese police stations, and the other is 15-minute cities. Could you share some your thoughts about these subjects?
I don't know nearly enough about the Chinese police stations to speak with any kind of authority. So I will say My limited understanding of it is there are some areas that have been set up that Chinese operatives are working out of, allegedly. It does seem to have some confirmation to it, but I don't know nearly enough about it to say anything other than I'll do some reading and we can come back to it next week. In regards to the 15-minute cities, that's the biggest nothing burger in the history of nothing burgers. It's literally a design idea. The premise behind the 15-minute cities is, hey, if you live in a neighborhood, you should be able to walk to a grocery store. You should be able to walk to a convenience store or a library. You shouldn't have to get on a bus and ride that bus for 45 minutes to get to your local amenities. And the reality is that when you take a look at how a lot of cities are designed, particularly Calgary, it's getting a little bit better, but the urban sprawl that we experience here, where we have gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs of houses and no amenities nearby, is a very real problem. And so the whole idea is, going forward, when we're building cities and when we're issuing new permits, we should be thinking about, are these areas walkable? Can people get a sense of community out of these spaces other than just warehousing people? It has been so over exaggerated, because one of the things that has been said is there will be some areas where potentially one of the things that might be looked at is closing certain roads from certain periods of times of day to give better access to people who are walking or cycling or but those would only be for certain periods of times of days. It's no difference than toll roads that exist all across the country. If you want to go on them, it's going to cost you more. Use a different road. It doesn't mean that anybody's going to get locked in. It doesn't mean that anybody's going to be like seconded into their neighborhood and can't leave. That's just absolute not true internet stuffs. So I don't know too much about the Chinese police stuff, or the Chinese police stations. I've read a little bit about it on the news, but that kind of falls out of the purview of provincial politics, and that's where I've been investing most of my energy and will be continuing certainly for the next, hopefully 28, 29 days. But I'll commit to doing some reading on that, and maybe we can pick that conversation up. But the 15-minute cities thing, that is purely maybe we should make cities more accessible to people. That's it. That's all. The whole they're going to lock us in and take away our car keys is pure bollocks.
I appreciate your insight. Is there any libertarian presence in Alberta right now?
It depends on how you define libertarian. I mean, there's certainly people who are operating under the guise of libertarianism, but I would argue that it's not true libertarianism. I think that there's a lot of people who like to use the word libertarian to justify getting what they want and screw what everybody else wants. My understanding of libertarianism is that it is, the freedom to do what you want, small government, but it's not the freedom from consequences. And what we have going on right now is a lot of people who are parading around as libertarians who are calling themselves libertarians, but they also want absolute freedom from all consequences. And that is not what libertarianism actually is. So, for example, the premier of the province currently self-identifies, air quotes, as libertarian, but as she does that, she doesn't acknowledge any of the existing rules or norms or standards for how government is supposed to work or how any of these things are supposed to work. And she does not want to accept any responsibility for the choices that she as a libertarian makes. I don't have any problem with the idea of libertarianism. I think that when you actually line up libertarianism in regards to political ideologies, I think it falls real close to something like anarchy, just because the idea is you need the least amount of rules as possible, and you deal with the consequences that you get. But what we have right now masquerading as libertarianism, I would argue not only in Alberta but certainly in the States as well, from the little that I read down there, is there's a lot of people who are using that word because it sounds like liberty, it sounds like freedom, but they don't want true freedom, because true freedom requires responsibility. It's a bit of a catch-22, but it's the reality. And I think that everybody who has served in any sort of public service or in the military understands that freedom ain't free. And so the idea that libertarianism as a thing can exist without any sort of consequences or rules or responsibility is it's fake. It's not real libertarianism, as far as I'm concerned. I hope does that answer it?
Yeah, I would add that there's 30 branches of libertarianism, and anarchy is one of them.
Oh, see, there we
go. And unfortunately, here in the States, the Libertarian Party has been co-opted by conservative libertarians, and they don't want people like me, left libertarians, involved. So, and that in itself is not really libertarian. So there's a lot of contradictions within libertarians. They're fighting constantly, and they don't have a pragmatic platform. So it sounds like Canada is mirroring what's going on here.
Unfortunately, I would have to agree with you. So, anything else you wanted to bring up tonight there, Eric?
Oh, no. Thanks so much for giving me so much of your insight. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all. You have a good night. I'm going to bring in, long time listener and many time speaker, Lynn. How are you doing tonight?
I'm okay.
Just okay?
Just wanted to give you an update.
There's been a little drama in your neck of the woods over the last couple of days.
Yeah, there has been, actually. I didn't want to pay the $3.85 to go to the dinner, but apparently there was more protesters than there was people attending. So that was good news for me, which was actually kind of shocking. But interestingly, some of my friends took me out for birthday dinner tonight, and two of them have previously attended church with Brian Jean. So the question always comes to the old people in the Crescent, Lynn, what are we going to do about Danielle? And I'm like, well, we're kind of hooped because we don't have an NDP candidate. So we have an independent who's normally I wouldn't vote for, but all I could offer was I'm going to put up her sign, and I'm going to put a yellow or an orange poster board in my window, and hopefully one of Brian's TBA people come to the door. Because now that I've been told that I can't ask, that I shouldn't be asking about that, I'm going to. Because I asked at the office this week what Tanny and Brian, because it's the same person that answers the phone, what their stance was. And the answer was, well, that sounds like a political thing, and you should probably call, which I did, and I got no response. But based on Brian taking pictures with, you know who, Parker.
Oh, he signed the bus.
I know.
Brian Jean signed the Take Back Alberta RV bus thing. So, I mean, he doesn't really get to distance himself, I don't think.
No, and I'm really hoping that Brian comes to our house, which he'll probably avoid because he knows how I feel about him. But anyway, somebody will come. So we'll just see how it goes from there. But I just thought it was really interesting because in the last election, I remember the one person saying to me, but Lynn, Brian is a good guy. And I'm like, that's not true. And now she's changed her tune.
There you go. You guys, I'm sure you'll get an NDP
Danielle
candidate up there, though. I mean, like, and I'm not saying vote NDP for the record, but I'm sure in the next couple of days they're going to be, because like the deadline I think is like the 11th or something like that. I'm sure they're going to be like, okay, and you go. They'll come up with someone.
Let's hope. I don't even care who it is. My husband said to me, because I said, if they nominate someone, I'm putting a sign up. And he's like, well, where are you going to put the sign? And I said, this house is in my name too. So on the right-hand side, I'm putting my sign up, and you can decide what you're doing with the left side.
That's fantastic. Lynn, I got to say, happy birthday as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, happy birthday. I hope it was a great day and a good dinner.
It was really good. Yeah.
Awesome.
But anyway, I'm still being very hopeful now that I'm seeing people that I'm shocked at. I'm married, but I've had a crush on Thomas for years. So that was like amazing epic for me.
He's got great hair.
He does, yeah. He has hair like my husband, actually.
Oh, see, well.
But anyway, I think because he's just a genuine person. I've always admired him, and glad to see some other previous UCPs stepping up to the base too and showing their disrespect for DeSantis. Whatever she's doing with that.
Yeah, that's
anyway. I just thought it was interesting, and I hope that we get a candidate up here.
I'm sure I would be shocked if the NDP didn't run a full slate, even in areas where they don't have much confidence.
Okay.
There we go.
Anyway, good night, guys.
All right, thanks, Lynn.
Okay.
All right, we got a new person in here. I know the name. I had the privilege of meeting this person just a little while ago at an event, and I'm curious to hear what he has to say. Vincent, what's going on tonight, sir?
Oh, I am just relaxing on the couch, listening in, and it was an absolute pleasure bumping into you at the Black Leaders function the other month. That was at Arts Commons.
It was such a good event. I was told that I was going by a very dear friend of mine, and it was an absolute privilege to be able to be there and observe and listen. I had such a good night.
And it's always well, it's like when communities get together and speak about, there's always that internal language of, a little bit of a back and forth. And I've always found the dialogue within communities fascinating. But I actually have two questions for you, Nate, and for the rest of the group here. One, I completely lost track of the little bit of a mini scandal around Elections Alberta and their requests for people to pre-register to vote. I know there were some folks that raised a bit of a kerfuffle saying, hey, is this a type of voter suppression? You don't actually need to register. So I was just wondering about your thoughts, on, where that conversation went and where folks are triaging energy on encouraging as many folks to vote as possible. And then I got question number 2 for you. There's been a bit of a push from a lot of folks to move to alternate platforms. I noticed Chad Ullman in the audience. He's helping with the Mastodon.ca Mastodon instance. And I was just, since you're a person that, saddles multiple platforms, placed in different social media environments, and have touch points in different communities across different online platforms, I was just wondering about your thoughts on how one could be effective this election with regards to speaking to as many folks as possible in many ways as possible on the different platforms as possible.
Okay, cool. Those are 2 very in-depth questions. So in regards to the Elections Alberta, the last thing that I saw is they did put out their little communication. It was like, oh, you have to have ID. And then a bunch of very, very smart people said, that's not true. And what you're doing is bad and wrong. And they kind of walked it back and they said, well, what we meant to say was, yeah, you can also do the other thing. But there was certainly a lot of conversation that, it was so niche that I don't know how much of an impact it actually had. And I do know that on some of the mail outs that they were sending, it did say on the back, or you can also do this. I think that it was bad communications for sure. I think it was definitely a little bit on the reckless and dangerous side for them to even be putting out the idea that you have to have ID, because you don't have to. It's easier for you. It involves not bringing another person who can vouch for you. But for some people who do not have ID for whatever reason, that doesn't mean that you can't vote. You absolutely can still vote. You just have to have somebody vouch for you. I think that got squashed so aggressively by so many people that I don't think that it's got any legs anymore. And I think that there's certainly some folks that have made a personal cause out of saying, hey, that's not cool. You can vote if you have somebody who will vouch for you, you can vote. And I would be very surprised if Elections Alberta made that mistake again. So I hope that kind of answers the first question. In regards to your second question about the social media, and don't get me, I love the idea of Mastodon, um, and I love the idea of the different platforms. One of the problems that I think exists, and certainly that we run into here, is there's two different types of well, there's a bunch of different types of communications, but one of the big questions, particularly around an election, is you have to go to where the people are. And I think that the hyper engaged people who are looking at the current state of affairs on the Twitter machine are going, oh, I don't like this so much. So I'm gonna jet, see ya, and migrating to other platforms. And I think that for some people, that communication does still work. I look at things like Substack. We're trying to do that with some regularity, although we're not doing great with it, to be honest. Um, and that works for people who are looking to express themselves as opposed to having a free flow of information. Mastodon seems like a great platform, but it's just still buggy, is my thing. And there's some barriers to entry that I think exist for it for a lot of people. I think a lot of people want to be able to, like, I want to download the app on my phone and then I want to get started on things right away. And I don't want to have to, what's an instance? That sounds complicated. Those things I think represent barriers to entry for a lot of people. You take a look at what the major social media platforms are that people are still using. You're talking about Twitter, you're talking about Facebook, you're talking about YouTube. Those are the mainstream ones. So I personally, I mean, I'm told TikTok, but I don't spend any time on TikTok. If I was looking to reach people in the next election purely through social media, I would still be staying with the conventional platforms. I don't think that we're going to see any big explosions of new platforms that the average person who's not engaged with politics is going to be accessing in a new way in the next 28 days. I just don't see that happening. I think most people are going to stick to what they know. So I think that we do have a Mastodon account, and I do try to remember to post things on there from time to time. But the other thing that I really do believe is, rather than trying to, like, the reason why we don't post to TikTok very often is because we're not good at TikTok. And that's okay. I don't think anyone who's involved with the breakdown goes, we need to be masters of all of the platforms. I don't think that that's what our jam is. We do long format conversations. And there's streaming platforms are amenable to that, and certainly in regards to the back and forth conversations that exist on Twitter, that's good for that. But we don't want to be great at TikTok. We don't want to be like the people who are doing, some of the people who are doing content generation on Instagram. They're doing stuff I can't even understand. I had to get Steve Boots to teach me how to do the the captions because I'm old. So there's certain things for certain places. I think that for this election, the main platforms are going to be the main places where people are going to be going to get information. I think you're talking about Twitter. Unfortunately, I think you're still talking about Facebook, and I think you're still talking about YouTube. I think more than anything, though, the biggest thing that's going to influence people's decisions in the election is going to be face-to-face conversations. I mean, Vincent, I know you've been involved in at least a little bit of politics from time to time. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the face-to-face conversations are the most impactful. They're the most driving of what's going to influence a person. It's not I'm going to browbeat you and come by your Twitter account and call you names. Those aren't the things that make someone go, oh, you know what? Maybe I should change my vote. It's the face-to-face conversations. And so I mean, we're going to be hanging out for the next 28 days and doing what we do here, and after that, whoever is elected. But for anybody who's looking to have any kind of meaningful impact on the voting folks, if you're trying to push a particular agenda or a party or a candidate, it's the face-to-face stuff. I mean, you think I'm wrong there, Vincent?
Oh, you're talking to a guy over a span of 10 years that knocked on about 100,000 doors.
So you've done a little.
And, just a little. And every campaign when the whole team did the work, the person who spoke to the most people won.
Yeah.
So it's a case in point. If folks are on this chat and they want to be involved in the political process, signing up to Canvas is pretty awesome and a great way to do it. And having those coffees and chats and that politicization and engaging with folks should be at the top of the ballot, like the top of the to-do list, as it were, to really shift and include as many people as possible this election. I'm a little sad that I'm actually sitting on my keister this election. I'm not part of a campaign. It's going to be the first provincial campaign where I haven't had a role in about, oh heavens, 12 years. So you're going to have some separation anxiety from the St. Pierre household, man.
You know what? I am in a similar boat, but super relieved to be doing what I'm doing. This is, and I don't get me wrong. I really, really enjoyed when I was doing door knocking, both for my own campaigns, but also for other campaigns. I'm one of those people that I love the thing of door knocking. I love the conversations. I love getting to hear firsthand what people are invested in and caring about and all of those things. I think it's a fantastic way to learn. You certainly run into some interesting characters, and I'm sure you have just as many stories as I do of sort of, oh, what now? But it is if you're going to, I'm a big believer that if you're going to try to represent as an elected official a group of people or a community, you have to be willing to invest the time into having those conversations with them and hearing what they're passionate about. Even if you disagree with them, you have to still have those conversations. And when you do that, I think that people see it. So we're gonna be doing our Twitter thing and our Facebook thing and our YouTube thing. That's what we do. But thanks for the questions. I hope I answered them reasonably coherently.
I think you did, and it was both the first question, it was an affirmation. I'm going like, okay, yeah, so that's where that was left. And then on the second point, hey, it's a tough question, man. And you added a bit, and I appreciate it. If there isn't anyone else putting up their hand or is on the speaker's roll, I got one other question, and it's seeking advice from someone who's been at this for a while. So just let me know if there's an opportunity for me to slip in one more cue.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to Cassandra because she's had her hand up for a while, and then we'll come back to you, and then we'll end with Ziad, and that'll be the night, I think, because we're coming up to our insanely long episode mark. So Cassandra, you got your hand up. If you're there, what's going on?
Oh, I was just going to say, I was just wondering, do we know what Lynn seems to be gone now, but do we know what Lynn's riding is?
I believe, he said cautiously, and I was actually going to seg to this, I believe that Lynn is Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo, and if that's the case, then the NDP actually did name its candidate as of April 26th. We got sent this from somebody while that conversation was going on, and it is, and I'm going to screw this up, Tanika Shason?
Oh, I got it here somewhere. I just had it.
Yeah, Tanika Shason or Tanika Shason, or I don't know which.
Tanika Shason for Fort McMurray. Wood Buffalo. And then there's another one. Where was it? Another northern. Where were the northern ones? The outmost northern ones. I'm losing it here. Grand Prairie, Kevin McLean, and Peace River, Liana Pava. I probably pronounced that last name wrong.
I mean, here's where I'll plug another Politico. Dave Berta, if you want the comprehensive list of who are the candidates and where, Dave Berta has that like that dude's got it locked up. So, like I was saying to Lynn, it appears if it is Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo, it is this Tanika or Tanika Shazen. And I would be absolutely stunned if the NDP didn't run a full slate. At the very least, they'll get somebody from like Edmonton to paper
Oh yeah, there
candidate.
will be, even if it's just they'll make sure there's at least somebody on the ballot.
Yeah, totally. Okay, I'm gonna go back to Vincent, and then we'll end with Ziad. Vincent, what was your other question, or your other comment, or?
So, started a podcast. I've noticed a couple other people have started podcasts. I've noticed a few folks starting up things for the beginning of the election, just as like an election project. I'm hoping to see Mike Morrison come back with the Democracy Donuts, this thing, that thing. What are your thoughts on election-focused engagement activities by people coming from civil society, i.e., the non-partisan engaging in democracy, encouraging folks and playing a role? What are your thoughts, and what's your advice on those individuals seeking to be a bettering force in our democratic dialogue?
I mean, I think we actually touched on this last week or earlier in the week. I can't remember when it was. When the whole Tariq Khan thing came up. So we did the episode on Sunday night, and then Monday morning the NDP lifted screen caps from our show, and we're like, oh, look what we found, and that's fine. Like, we don't care. And I think that one of the most important, if I was, good God, to give advice to somebody looking at podcasting or anything like that, know what it's about. That's so critical, because if it becomes about, like, the way the terminology that we use here is, it has to be about getting signal through noise. That's what it has to be about. If it starts to become about anyone's ego, if it starts to be about anyone's personal agenda, then that turns into a problem really, really quick, because that adds more noise to the signal. So if you're trying to drive engagement or get people to pay attention to a thing, it has to be about the thing. If it's about the person who's presenting that information more than it is the information, then that's where not only will you end up getting really, really discouraged really, really quickly, I think, because, I mean, the breakdown is now into its fourth year as a project. And it's been a sustained effort by a lot of people to get the breakdown to where it is. We're not a big deal, but to even get to where we are, it's been a 4-year investment of a lot of time and a lot of energy. And so, unless you have, like, if Rachel Notley, for example, was to say, "Hey, my friend Timmy's got this great podcast. You should listen to it." It takes time to grow an audience. It takes time for people to know who you are, and have any degree of trust in what it is that you're saying. So if people are looking to do engagement stuffs, I think Mike Morrison with his Democracy Donuts, I mean, Mike Morrison's got a pretty good name, pretty big name beside him. So he's able to drive some engagement just by being Mike Morrison. And he's cultivated that persona online over a fair amount of time. So understand that it takes time to grow an audience. The other anecdote that I'll offer is that when we started doing the breakdown, I came to it with sort of the mindset that I had after doing punk rock for a decade and a half. Well, probably closer to 2 decades, but I don't want to admit that. And when I first started playing punk rock shows, I was getting paid in hot dogs playing to an audience of 5 people. And once I got okay with that, and I was just doing it because I loved it, that's where I found the meaning. If anybody starts a podcast or any sort of engagement thing, and the goal in their head is, I'm going to change the election, you're going to be disappointed with anything other than the grand result. But if you're doing it because you're passionate about the thing, if you're doing it because you want to see people get engaged with whatever that thing is, and you put the time and the energy and the work into it, sure, I think it's a fantastic platform. I love doing these shows. I love the interviews that I've been able to do over the years. I mean, and it can end up meaning a whole lot to you. And anybody just needs to go and look and watch the bit where we launched the GoFundMe for the ongoing legal shit show. This show means a tremendous amount to me, and I think everybody who's involved in it. It can become a very rewarding thing, but just do it for the right reasons. That would be my biggest thing, because it's a big market. There's a lot of people out there who have things that they want to say. It takes a long time to get comfortable. You want to see some train wreck? Go back and watch the first couple of episodes that we ever uploaded to our YouTube channel. And I went back and watched some of those a while ago, and I was like, oh man, we've learned so much. So yeah, I mean, I would never discourage anyone from trying to be engaged and trying to get other people engaged, but just make sure that you get realistic expectations, because if you don't, and if you're doing it for anything other than getting the signal through the noise, it's a hard road to hoe. That was a long-winded answer. Does that kind of address it though, Vincent?
The best answers are often long-winded. So cut yourself some slack, Nate.
Cool. I'm going to use that as my excuse from now on. I'm talking for a long time because it's quality. Thanks, man.
No worries. I'm going to put myself back on listener.
All right. I'm going to bring Ziad in for some final thoughts about the arena deal, and then we're going to wrap it up because this is turning into a Lord of the Rings episode.
And I fell asleep during those movies. I don't want to do that to your show.
Yeah, please don't.
It's a pleasure hearing Vince talk. He and I have spoken on Livewire broadcasts on Friday nights before, so it's nice to hear Vince here. I wanted to talk about land options, and I'm replying back to Dwayne Bratt's tweet from April 28th, where he shared a Calgary Herald article on the 4 pieces of land around the to-be entertainment district. And then the right of first offer is a different kind of option on the Victoria Park bus barns. So Councillor Giancarlo Carra is the one who's quoted there, and having, I believe, a Master of Urban Planning, he tends to have more authority in what he says, but he's misleading the public here. One thing he says is that the city will sell the real estate at full market value. Well, that doesn't come from giving one party exclusive options. Full market value comes from having an open auction where all potential bidders can bid. So when you grant an option to someone, you're giving them an exclusive right to buy at a certain price for a certain period of time, and it locks out any competition. And CSEC is not going to make a deal breaker out of this transaction where they must have the lands if the options are for them to pay full market value. They want to pay a discount to full market value, and they want to leverage their advantage over the city with that. The second thing he says is that giving CSEC avenues to reinvest that capital back here is absolutely essential to the entire deal. Well, if you put the property up for sale in an open option, everybody has avenues to reinvest capital or to invest capital. An open auction doesn't lock out CSEC or any other bidder. What CSEC is doing with these options is locking out the competition, and the city is granting them that value without putting that value in the deal. So when the city values this deal saying, oh, we're putting in this much here and this much there, they should be valuing these options as well because they're worth money. Final point on what a right of first offer is. So, we've got that deal that our premier has unilaterally granted to a charter school at the Smart Technologies building in the University Research Park. And there's a daycare there that services the university and other communities in the neighborhood, saying, hey, what about us? I mean, you're selling it out from under us, and we have to be gone by September or earlier based on renovations. So what a right of first offer is done is it's usually given by landlords to tenants in the lease that if I'm going to sell the building, you have the right of first offer to buy the building from me before it goes on the open market. And typically that's an advantage to the landlord because it allows them to get better quality tenants and to have better lease terms. And tenants have more reassurance that they can invest in a building, invest in leasehold improvements, knowing that the building isn't going to be sold out from under them without them having a bit of a crack at buying it before it goes on the open market. So the Victoria Park bus barns are what's known as the jewel in the crown. That land there at the corner of Elbow and Bow Trail, essentially, is so valuable for condos, offices, hotels. It's beautiful land there. It's kind of where Calgary's name comes from, is the, this confluence of the two rivers. And it's got ugly bus barns on it right now, but to not allow an open competition for all that land is ridiculous. CSEC is not a current tenant there. Calgary Transit is the current tenant there. So CSEC should not be getting a right of first offer there. So Councillor Cara's representations here are misleading. He should know better. And I hope other reporters or people trained in finance can comment on this, because the city should also be valuing this in their representation of the deal. These options have value, just like the land under the arena has value. Okay, that's it I had.
Cool.
That's all I had.
Thanks, man. All right. I'm going to do a little bit of plugging here because we got some fun stuff coming up. Before I do, though, I want to just take a sec to metaphorically pour one out for all of the MLAs who have served in the legislature, for whom maybe got like 12 hours officially left as MLAs because they're not running again. There's certainly more than a couple who have served in the legislature who are not going to be running in the next election. And, as much as there is the partisan back and forth, and certainly there's some that some people might maybe like to see go sooner than later, and some that maybe some are glad are not running, and et cetera, et cetera. The bottom line is serving an elected office is not easy work. It's extraordinarily demanding. And I think that there's some people who do a really good job of navigating difficult circumstances. And I'm just going to give a special little shout out here to one of the MLAs that I wish things had played out differently for, because I think that she does an amazing job representing her constituents. As somebody who's had the privilege of talking to her a couple of times on the show here, she's the only UCP MLA who's ever come on the show. I'm speaking, of course, of Leela here, and this is the end of the road for Leela for the time being. So, let's just take a moment to appreciate everybody who has served in the legislature, because it is at its core, it is service. I want to talk a little bit about what the schedule is going to look like for the next little bit, because we got us an election coming up over the next month. We're going to be going through a little bit of a weird transition thing, because normally we would do live show Sunday and then interview show Wednesday. We're going to be flipping that up starting this week. So we'll be back on Wednesday with another live show. And then we're going to be doing our interview episodes on Sundays for a little bit. And we've got some special stuff planned. So with the election coming, we figured one of the good ways to kick things off would be to host a couple of panel discussions. And we're happy to, I want to be real clear, we're happy to do this with any of the parties. Any parties or candidates who want to come on the show and have a conversation about why they're running, what they're running for, what their party's platform is, why people should look at them, why people should consider them. We're more than happy to do that, to be clear. But we're going to be kicking it off because one of the parties specifically reached out and said, hey, can we do a panel thing? And we're up for it. So we're going to be next Sunday, week from tonight, we're going to be featuring a panel discussion with, I think it's like 6 or 7. It's almost the full slate of Alberta party candidates. So we've got a bunch of different Alberta party candidates from across the province who we grilled. We toasted them pretty good. It was a fun little conversation, and we're going to be putting that up on Sunday. We also have a couple of when I talked about having the Honorable Thomas Lukasik on the show, I alluded to it first because I didn't want to jinx it and say the name. There's another name that's coming. We're supposed to be recording it this week, and it'll be dropping the following Sunday. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited. If it happens and we're able to present it in the way that I'm hoping we are, it's going to be, it'll be another high water mark. And as always, if you want early access to those things, we don't paywall our stuff, but we give early access. If you want early access to our interview episodes, then you can join our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy little cup of coffee a month, for as little as $5 a month, you can not only get early access to all of our interview episodes, but you also get the warm fuzzy feeling that comes from knowing that you're supporting a show that does a pretty good job of pissing off a whole bunch of politicians on a semi-regular basis. So that's nice too. And you can tell them. I'm sure Danielle Smith loves it when people tweet at her, "Hey, I'm supporting the breakdown." I bet she gets a big kick out of that because we can't, because she's blocked us. So there's that. And that's pretty much it for this week. That was a long one. 2 hours and 16 minutes tonight. Thank you to everybody who spoke tonight. Thank you to everybody who had some questions. Love the participation that we're getting on. And see, this is another thing to what Vincent was asking. I love the participation that we get on the Twitter Spaces. I also love the participation that we get through the chat. Our chat was lit tonight. There's so many comments going on. I couldn't keep up. One of my favorite things to do after the show is done is I go through and I read all of the comments. I know you're not supposed to read the comments, but I do. So big thank you to everybody who is participating in the chat tonight. And a big thank you to everybody who's listening live. If you're watching it on the YouTube or the Facebook or the Twitter machine, or if you're just listening to the audio version of the podcast, thanks for sticking around. This was a long one. Much appreciated. Tomorrow morning is the day we're heading into the election, folks. It's going to be nuts. It's going to be a bumpy ride. We're going to be here for the whole thing, though. We will see you back here on Wednesday for another live show at 8 p.m. And in the meantime, like we talked about with Vince there, the most important thing that you can do if you want to see either the party that you support make some headway, or if you just want to get people more aware of what's going on, please talk to them about Take Back Alberta. The best thing that you can do is have those conversations. It's going to be a long month. It's going to be nutty. You need to take care of yourselves. Make sure that you're taking time to have the rest. But as always, the most important thing that you can do, keep the conversation going. Thanks, everyone.